who's not. Mr. Durbin.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Durbin.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. There are many controversial issues that have been raised in this hearing: warrantless wiretapping, the political dismissal of U.S. attorneys, and the like. I think that this administration and your tenure as Attorney General will be haunted in history by another issue, and that's the issue of torture. It is the reason I couldn't vote for your confirmation. The role that you played as counsel to the President in saying that we as a nation did not have to follow the torture statute and the provisions of the Geneva Conventions. Now, last Friday, President Bush signed an executive order interpreting Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions for the purposes of CIA's secret detention and interrogation techniques. The executive order rejected your earlier position and acknowledges that the CIA must follow applicable law, including Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, the torture statute, and the McCain Torture Amendment, which I was happy to co-sponsor. Do you now agree that Common Article 3 applies to all detainees held by the United States?
What I can say is that certainly Common Article 3 applies to all detainees held by the United States in our conflict with Al-Qaeda.
And I'm sorry,
our conflict with Al-Qaeda, yes.
Well, I'm worried about the qualification at the end. Are you suggesting that other terrorist conflicts are not covered by Common Article 3 in terms of the treatment of detainees?
You know, we have to look at the words of Common Article 3. The Supreme Court rendered a decision about the application of Common Article 3 with respect to our conflict with Al-Qaeda only. And so I believe, if I recall correctly, if that were the case, if there were a different kind of conflict that on its face isn't covered by Common Article 3, then obviously we would not be legally bound by Common Article 3, although I think the President has said we're going to treat people humanely nonetheless.
So let me get into a specific here. Last year, the highest-ranking attorneys in each of the 4 military services, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, the Judge Advocates General, testified before this committee, and I sent them follow-up questions asking their opinion about specific abusive interrogation techniques that this administration has reportedly authorized. I received their responses this morning, and Mr. Chairman, I ask consent that those responses be made a part of the record.
They will be made part of the record.
Mr. Attorney General, the opinion of the Judge Advocates Generals was unanimous. They all agreed that the following interrogation techniques violate Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, and there are 5. Painful stress positions, threatening detainees with dogs, forced nudity, waterboarding, and mock execution. Do you agree?
Senator, I'm not going to get into a public discussion here about possible techniques that may be used by the CIA to protect our country. What I can say is the executive order lays out a very careful framework to ensure that those agents working for the CIA, trying to get information about the next attack, do so in a way that is consistent with our legal obligations. And so, again, without commenting on specific techniques, we understand what the rules of the road are.
Mr. Attorney General, do you know what you are saying to the world about the United States when you refuse to acknowledge that these techniques are beyond the law, beyond the tradition of America? These Judge Advocates General have a responsibility as well. They have been explicit and unanimous. The problem with your statement, Mr. Attorney General, is that you are leaving room for the possibility that you disagree with them.
And of course, those in the military are subject to the Army Field Manual. It's a standard of conduct that is way above Common Article 3. And so they come at it from a different perspective, quite frankly, Senator. And again, I wish I could talk in more detail about specific actions, but I cannot do that in an open setting.
Let me just ask you to consider this for a moment. Aside from the impact of what you've just said on America's reputation in the world, aside from the fact that we have ample record that you have disagreed with the use of Geneva Convention standards and have pushed the torture issue beyond where the courts or the Congress would take it, would it be legal for a foreign government to subject a United States citizen to these so-called enhanced interrogation techniques which I just read?
Would it be legal for the United States government to subject,
No, for a foreign government.
for a foreign
To
government?
subject a United States citizen to any of the 5 interrogation techniques which I read to you?
Well, again, Senator, we would take the position, if you're talking about an American soldier who fights pursuant to the rules of
No,
Geneva
that's
Convention,
it's a different story. It's a uniformed person. I'm talking about a U.S. citizen.
would it be legal under their laws? Would it be legal under international standards? What do you mean by would it be legal?
As the
We
chief-
obviously would demand humane treatment and treatment for our U.S. citizens consistent with international legal obligations.
And would
And
you
that's what this president expects of those of us who work in this
And
government.
do you believe these techniques which I have read to you would be beyond the laws and the international standards if they were used against an American citizen?
Senator, you're asking me to answer a question which I think may provide insight into activities that the CIA may be
No, I'm
may be
asking you a
involved with in the
hypothetical
future.
question. Anytime we get close to a specific issue, an investigation, recuse yourself.
Every time
Now
you-
I'm asking you for a general observation. Mr. Attorney General, the point I'm making to you is if you cannot be explicit about the standards of conduct and the values of this country when it comes to the use of torture, you create an ambiguity which unfortunately reflects badly on America around the world and invites those who would take American citizens as captives and detainees to also suggest, well, there's an ambiguity. We can go a little further than perhaps international law allows.
Well, what's prohibited would be grave breaches, which are set forth
What about these
in-
5 specifics?
in the Military Commissions Act. There's also violations of the DTA, which would be violations of the cruel, inhumane, degrading standard, which is tied to our constitutional standards of shocking the conscience. And then there are prohibited actions which would be covered by the President's executive order. And again, it would depend on circumstances, quite frankly.
Well, that's the kind of ambiguity which allows many people to conclude that you personally and this administration, whether by signing statements or Bybee memos, are really trying to leave a little opening in a door for the United States to engage in conduct which we condemn around the world. The last question I want to ask you is this. The latest national intelligence estimates suggest that al-Qaeda is stronger today than they were on 9/11. It suggests, as we all know, that Osama bin Laden, is still at large. And it suggests that Guantanamo has become a symbol of injustice around the world. Can you explain to me why 5 years after the Guantanamo detention situation has been created, there hasn't been a single conviction of any of these detainees or combatants for any wrongdoing?
It's not for lack of trying on the government's part, Senator. It's because
Could be lack of
individu-
competence.
these individuals have been provided process, and they're taking advantage of that process, and I don't begrudge them for it, for hiring good lawyers and defending their interests in the courts. And so we're slugging it out in the courts. And, I'd like to get all these issues resolved. I'd like to bring all these individuals to justice. So we're doing our best, but we're doing it in a way that reflects the reality that these individuals have the opportunity and the means to go into court to contest what we're doing.
I would suggest 5 years ago, Senator Specter and I proposed legislation to create military commissions, which we thought would have given you that opportunity, and the administration was not receptive. Thank you, sir.